everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Moving the Mission, Field Insights from the 2025 CVI Conference. My name is Paul Carrillo. I'm the Vice President of the Giffords Center for Violence Intervention. We launched the center a few years ago with a clear mission: to champion the work of community-based organizations that save lives every day. These efforts are remarkably effective when provided with the right funding, support, and visibility. Our team identifies and promotes proven, non-punitive community violence intervention strategies. We connect practitioners with policymakers and work alongside them to secure the resources needed to sustain and expand these life-saving efforts nationwide. As you all know, those closest to the pain of gun violence are also those closest to the solution, which is why we're committed to amplifying the voices of practitioners and advocates who have spent decades making their community safer. The reality is that Black and Brown communities bear a disproportionate share of the harm and trauma caused by community violence. And if we are serious about reducing it, our approaches must be culturally competent, grounded in equity, and led by credible messengers whose trust and relationships cannot be compromised. Thank you for being steadfast partners in the fight to save lives from community violence. Today's conversation is the first in a series we'll hold between now and next year's CVI conference. These webinars are a way to keep learning together, not just to reflect on topics from the conference, but to go deeper on the issues you told us matter most and to help identify opportunities in your communities where change can take root. Before I hand it over to Jordan, I'm excited to announce that our 2026 CVI conference will be held back in Los Angeles on July 20th and 21st. So save the dates, mark your calendars. That's once again in Los Angeles at the JW Marriott on July 20th and 21st, Monday and Tuesday. Save the dates and look out for more information that will come early next year. Our call for proposals opens in January. We encourage you to consider submitting. I will say that it is very competitive. We usually receive over 130 submissions with only 24 slots. That means that we have to say no to at least 100 submissions. It's obviously not an indication of how important your work is or isn't, or the level of effectiveness. We do our best to ensure that the program is diverse and equitable. Please continue to give us grace as every year we do our best. Thank you for the work that you all do and the ways that you show up for your communities. With that, I will hand it over to Dr. Jordan Costa, our Senior Program Manager. As part of her role, she works closely with partners across the field to turn your insights into resources that serve the broader CVI community. In that spirit, she will be guiding our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone for being here. I just want to say we are so grateful for every moment you choose to spend in space with us, and today is no exception. But unfortunately, I have to start with what's happening right now in our country. This week, 800 National Guard troops were sent to Washington, D.C. in the name of addressing violence and public safety. But what's missing from that announcement is any recognition of the people who are already out there every day doing that work without armored vehicles or weapons, like the violence interventionists who show up in the very places and moments where tensions are highest, or the outreach workers who are trying to develop relationships with those most likely to shoot or be shot at, or the hospital responders who meet families in their worst moments and try to stop the next shooting before it happens. These are the people who know the names, the histories, and the pain behind these statistics. Yet when the crisis comes, our reflex as a country is still to call in force before we call in community. And that's not just a policy choice, it's a statement about whose labor and leadership we value. And that's exactly why this space matters, because here we get to push back on that reflex. We get to name the work for what it is. It's professional, it's essential, it's deeply human, and we get to talk about how to strengthen it so that safety isn't something done to communities, but something that's built with them. 2 months ago, nearly 1,000 of us came together for the 2025 CVI Conference, which is the largest space in the nation dedicated to community-led, non-punitive responses to gun violence. In Los Angeles, we were able to be in space with people from regions all over the world in a rare gathering where frontline workers, survivors, funders, policymakers, researchers, and government partners come face to face, not in silos, not on panels alone, but in shared rooms, speaking as equals, shaping the future of this work together. And that mix matters. This year, 63% of people were there for the first time. Others have been with us for 2 or 3 years running. Folks came from 32 states and DC, representing over 350 organizations and more than 190 cities. We had newcomers with just a year in the work and veterans with 15 years or more. And that's what makes it a living, breathing ecosystem. It's the mentorship flowing in both directions and the fresh ideas meeting hard-won insights. Every year after those days together, we pull the stories, the strategies, the truths you've shared and turn them into a public report, which is now available online, and it's fittingly called Moving the Mission, Field Insights from the 2025 CVI Conference, which is the anchor of this webinar series. And it's our offering back to you and to the field as we collectively work to embed CVI in our public safety ecosystem. It captures who was in the room, yes, but also what lit people up, what sparked new thoughts, and what do we still need to keep wrestling with. It lifts up the sessions that stayed with you most, whether it was learning how to use cognitive behavioral interventions on the street, centering emotional wellness in trainings, honoring women leaders whose labor too often goes unseen, or calling for deeper cross-sector investment to keep the work alive. It names the hot topics you leaned into, like self-care that's actually possible, what it takes to build professional understanding between CVI and law enforcement, or how to keep rural communities from being left out of the safety conversation. And we also don't shy away from the gaps you named either, like the need for stronger frameworks for state coalitions, for behavioral health to be better integrated into CVI, and for Latino leaders to have real power at decision-making tables so our work is culturally sensitive and contextually relevant. We also took on something we hear all the time, the phrase community-led. It's a phrase we love, but it can also mean different things depending on who says it. This year, we asked you to define it in your own terms, and you did that. And what came back was very powerful, and we built a structure around those answers. We pulled together 4 pillars based on your responses, which were proximity, shared power, accountability, and alignment with community values. So now when we say community-led, we know exactly what we mean because you showed up to help us define it. And because language shapes how the world sees this work, we also pulled together a glossary at your request. So we can all speak from the same dictionary, and it's rooted in the way you talk about the work across disciplines without losing the heart of it. And that's the benefit of this conference. It's really an incredible space for learning, for growing, for sharpening each other, but it's only 2 days. And too often the breakthroughs from that week risk getting left there. And that's why days like today matter. So like Paul said, this is the first in a series of conversations we'll have between now and next year's gathering, spaces where we can go deeper with different groups of stakeholders, tackle what matters most to you, and surface opportunities to drive change in your communities. It's also a way to honor the fact that this work is happening year-round in many places and many forms. And so when we come together next year, we're meeting as co-builders, bringing a year's worth of growth, insights, and follow-through with us each time. Which brings me to today. This conversation is about frontline realities, but we're going deeper than simply saying the work is essential or the work is difficult. We want to ask, how is it done? What toll does it really take? And most importantly, how can we help? The people you're about to hear from have lived this work, have shaped it, they've challenged it. They take us beyond the headlines, beyond the talking points, and into the truth of what it means to hold peace in your hands day after day. And they'll help us think about what real support looks like from leadership, from funders, from policy, so this work isn't just possible, but it's sustainable. So for the next 45 minutes, consider this a shared space. Maybe you're still processing moments from the conference that connect to today's conversation. Maybe you couldn't be there, but this topic sparks questions or reflections for you. But either way, we'd love to hear you. So we're not going to hold questions until the end in a formal Q&A format. Please utilize the chat to put your thoughts and questions as they come, and I'll work in as many as I can while we talk. So with that, I'm excited to welcome Sam Castro from the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago and Timmeka Perkins from the Annie E. Casey Foundation to the virtual stage. Hello, hello, brilliant people. Thank you for being here. I just have to say real quick, Sam, at the conference, you sat on that stage and you set the record straight about the struggles and stories of frontline work. You let us in on what failure feels like, what success feels like, and the very complicated, messy realities of showing up for people in their darkest moments, and you didn't sugarcoat it. And because of that, we actually got to see what's really at stake and what it takes when you do this work. And I'm still so grateful that you trusted us with those vulnerable insights, because I think that panel really gave us permission to be vulnerable over the course of those 2 days as we strategize the heart work. So I just want to start by saying thank you for setting the tone. And Timmeka, you represented something we've been wanting to see for years, which was a full celebration of CVI, women in CVI on the main stage. You took that backbone line from the session description and made it real, talking about how the spine holds the body together, gives it movement, carries the weight. And you showed us how women do that for this movement. And I still have chills from the moment you asked all the women interventionists to stand up in the room. And 2 loud, proud standing ovations later, it was very clear how much that moment mattered. And so I just want to thank you specifically, not just for your skill as a moderator and holding that space so well, but for your heart as a person and a funder who truly sees the people doing this work. And that's where I want to start today. You each represent sessions that left marks on my spirit at the conference, but I'm wondering what's still resonating with you from what you experienced. It's been 2 months. Not everyone in this virtual audience attended every session or was able to make it to LA. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself, what you do in your roles, but also what stayed with you. Any new aha moments that stuck, new insights that gained new weight, or connections that you want to lift up. Whoever wants to start, I'd love to hear.
I was going to defer to you. So good morning to those on the West Coast. Good afternoon to everybody else. I'm Timmeka Perkins, serve as a senior associate focused on community safety efforts with the NEAKC Foundation, supporting now 35 cities engaged in community violence intervention across the country. And Jordan, I think that what you just said is what's sticking with me. So I had the privilege of facilitating a panel that has been, as you said, a long time coming on the main stage about women in the work. And it was a huge step. And I got a lot of feedback after that from partners, but as well as from people who were strangers at the time, but are not strangers anymore. And while a lot of the feedback was positive, I think the one thing that is sticking with me is that there's a need for a deeper conversation, one that goes deeper into women throughout the ecosystem, specifically on the front line. We did our best to hold space for that, but I think that that is something that's a conversation that we need to go deeper in, and also one where we're talking about women and girls as participants, women and girls at the highest risk for involvement in gun violence, and then one that really delves into the healing and how do we all work together and coexist throughout this ecosystem. So I'm glad that we're having these facilitated conversations. I think the mark of a good panel is how much conversation occurs after it. And so I'm hoping that that's the first of many around that specific topic area. I think the other thing that was really, really clear to me at the convening that stuck with me, I'm in like middle career. I'm approaching middle age. And so there's a whole field of emerging leaders that is coming up. And I'm really, really excited about that, but I don't want them to get lost in the mix. And so the networking opportunities, but just the opportunities to be in space was very eye-opening to me. I think we all talk a lot about how violence mutates like a disease, right? So our strategies really have to mutate with that. And with emerging leaders, it comes fresh ideas. And so that was a real call to action to me about how do we make sure that those emerging leaders have the opportunity to be in place and space, but not just to learn, but also to have their voice uplifted. And so when I look at some of the initiatives like the Black and Brown Collectives Fellowship and things like that, how do we make sure that that is represented throughout the ecosystem so that individuals can have that leadership pipeline, so they can have that access? But also, as we're having some conversations about the things that we'll say seasoned people in this work are having about, like, how do we break down silos? How do we prioritize wellness? How do we make sure that we're engaging emerging leaders in those conversations? So rather than have to unlearn habits, they come in with the spirit of collaboration, and they come in with a prioritization of self-care and wellness, not just for the community, because we can externalize it, but how do we make sure that ourselves and our staffs are also a part of that conversation?
Uh, as the sister said, good morning to some and good afternoon to others. My name is Sam Castro. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Partnership at the Institute for Nonviolence of Chicago. One of the most things that stuck out to me is exactly what you were saying, Jordan. When you lead with vulnerable, showing that, I think it's a powerful tool. And for us brothers, especially men of color, when they look at that and they're like, man, is it cool to do that? So making that cool, right? And setting that the stage where people could be themselves and be genuine, I think that's magical. And sometimes what I believe happens when we're in the pot and we're steady running to the fire, sometimes we doubt, does it work? So when you share and then afterwards, the reflection part, I met so many new people. It was maybe 25 or 30, and they were like, wow. So in my heart, I was like, it was a wow for me that they felt. It was a wow that they see like the value of what street outreach does.
Thank you both for that. And listening to both of you and the impetus for having this conversation in the first place, it just reminds me that as the field grows and professionalizes, there's another layer to this conversation, right? It's not just about who is credible, but it's also about who decides who is credible. And so some see lived experience as the most essential qualification. Others still defer to titles and degrees and institutional proximity. So Sam, I'd love to start off with you, and Timmeka, if you feel moved to respond, please do. But when you think about this field and your experience, who gets seen as credible and by who? And who still has to prove themselves in ways others don't? And how do we push back on this idea that legitimacy only comes from institutions?
So for me, I believe that the lived experience in itself, it's a degree, right? We went through that not by choice or by bad choices, but it is a degree in itself. And for me, a credible messenger is someone who just wants to help their community out. That's the truth, that you care about people and you want to be there. Sometimes it depends on some cases, the LTO, the license to operate. You can borrow somebody that and handle with care. But often people look at outreach and saying, well, they're only good because they know what's happening in the moment, but also they are decision makers because the closest to the fire gotta have the solution. So a lot of time people underestimate what the frontline staff do, but they're really who should have that's an important say so on what direction we need to go because they're in the fire every day.
If I can jump in there, I want to echo everything that Sam said. I think credibility, lived experience, license to operate, they're essential components of the effectiveness of CVI. But I've also been having a lot of conversation with partners and saying that that lived experience is not the only expertise that folks bring to the table. Even with a degree, without a degree, there are a lot of transferable skills that really should be emphasized to give them credibility in other spaces and allow them to be seen as experts in other spaces, frontline and beyond. And then the other thing I will say is credible messengers go both directions. A lot of times we think specifically within community, right? But it's all about collaboration and allies. That we need to have credible messengers within funding spaces, within decision making spaces, within policy making spaces, who have that bridge to the folks that are out there on the front line every day, so that we can take back that shared messaging and really build a united front. And I think that those are the conversations we really got to expand our mind on what credibility looks like and really value everybody's expertise.
And just a follow-up that comes up for me hearing you both speak, I'm wondering, have you seen any practical examples of how to go about building a bridge like that? Like, what is the first step in building that connection where people can see the credibility on both sides?
Sorry, y'all, we was having some technical difficulties. Wouldn't let me come off mute. I think it starts with relationship building. I think a lot of times things can seem really transactional. And so when you build that relationship, you build that trust. And with trust comes the allowance of proximity. And so there's a lot of things that can really be a lot of barriers that can be eliminated with honest, open communication and just a willingness to show up. And I'm speaking as a funder when I say that. There's got to be a willingness to show up, to see the work, to have the conversations, to really hold space for individuals to be vulnerable about, like, these are the challenges that we're facing. This is the reality of the work that we're doing. This is how the changes or the processes that are implemented are impacting us. But those things happen over time and with trust. This is a long-term strategy, a long-term game. And so can we show up consistently over time?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I firmly believe that funders have to be doing site visits and seeing the work that they fund in practice to just even understand the nature of it, and even if the funds that are being allocated are even being stewarded in the right ways. So I appreciate that. I want to shift us to confront something we're all feeling in the field right now in similar and different ways, which is the federal cuts. Hundreds of millions of dollars in public safety grants were terminated effective immediately a few months ago, stripping resources from CVI and the broader community safety ecosystem. And if those funds aren't restored, or if those cuts hold, then the risk of increased violence is very real, and it's going to be our most vulnerable communities who feel it first. So with that reality in mind, Timmeka, I'd love to hear your take on how we can adapt our investment strategies to better protect communities at this moment.
So when you sent me that question, I have to be honest, I was like, I wish I had the answer to that. I do. One thing that I will say is that we really have to have real conversations about our view of the root causes. Like, we have to really keep that public health approach in mind now more than ever. A lot of times when I talk to other funders or to students, I say, when we're visiting a site, one of the first thing I ask them what they think the first thing that I do is. I'm like, no one ever gets it right. But as I ride around and see how long it takes me to see a grocery store, because there's an element of, like, hunger, food insecurity, and that being a root cause of violence. I think now, though, we have to have a conversation about how are we willing to collaborate? Who's at the table? We have to understand how food insecurity and housing and education impact community and drive violence, because our strategy has to change. There has to be other people at the table, because even if you have the best violence interrupters, the best strategy, when people are in very desperate situations, because these funding cuts did not just impact CVI, it's going to impact the effectiveness of what we do. What do we do when people don't have referral sources? So I think in this moment, collaboration is going to be one of the biggest strategies. Collaboration while keeping our mission and our role very, very in mind. And we have to be really open to unlikely allies, or allies who we've never had at the table before, and just keep our mission and our messaging very, very pure and succinct. I think that's the foundation of any strategy, and that foundation, while other components of a funding strategy may have to pivot because changes are coming every day, that is the foundation that won't change and will allow us to have something firm to build upon over the next however long.
Yeah, it's a very interconnected ecosystem when it comes to the factors that are necessary to keep our communities safe and stable. I'm wondering, Sam, are you seeing that on the ground in the challenges that some of your clients might be navigating, or that you're supporting folks with, the ways that it's not just violence in a container in the sense of beefs or interpersonal things, but broader conditions about stability and that influence stability and safety?
Yeah, so as Timmeka was saying, so it's kind of both. So yeah, the layoffs and then happen, and then the resources gone, and then we're trying to figure out what to do. So we're at a critical moment where we all have to figure this out together and build a bond. The good thing is that a lot of people have been putting in some amazing work, so now it's time to go back and strengthen those relationships and be like, hey, remember, like bring that sense of hope back to the community. It's rough, and as we was just sharing, we had a rough few days, and the sister was sharing some of our partners have had some rough days the last 4 days. So it's not only the cuts of jobs, but as she was saying, the resource. And then when it starts getting tight out there and people are looking, it's at the highest time where we have to stand together, and figure this out and leverage our own relationships and rely on the relationships that we built.
Yeah, and I appreciate you both sharing that. I also think that part of protecting communities is, like you said, Sam, protecting the people who do this work. And I know on our team we care a lot about supporting frontline wellness, and that's in part because some of us have served our communities in direct service roles. But I want to unpack what that actually requires in practice. Um, Sam, I'm curious about, like, what's one toll this work takes on frontline folks that rarely gets named out loud? And what would it take organizationally or systematically to stop that harm before it starts? So in other words, like, what would you advise leadership of other CVI organizations to do to protect their staff's well-being? I know IMVC has a couple initiatives, and I'm curious to see what's been working there. And Timmeka, I'd love for you to jump in with what you've invested in or what you've seen other funders try, and where you've seen real impact or where those gaps still exist.
Yeah. So we're grateful here at the Institute that we have a team, behavior and wellness team. And I've seen that, uh, especially with the frontline staff, we're always curious or saying like, I don't know if this is gonna work. But when you see our staff engaging with the clinical teams and talking about it, because normally how we decompress, we go into the office and talk about shootings and what happened and how to figure this out. So at the Institute, we're blessed that we lean on them and they hear us out, and they created a power hour session. So I would say organization needs to invest in that and take a time out and mandate that for our people. Cause a lot of black and browns, if you like, oh, go talk to a clinic, I'm gonna be like, man, I'm not crazy. Like, but once you get in there and you have the moments and they're talking to you like, okay, this is work. I needed to let go. And for me, I say myself, I didn't know what it was. Last year I had a moment like that, and I was walking down the hallway and the tears just came out, and I'm like, what is that? And like the next day I had the same episode. So when I get to talking to my behavior team, they're like, you see, Sam, you need to come see us. So I'm like, all right, I'm there. Let's go talk about it. Cause a lot of times we just put it on our shoulder and we try to carry it. That's not gonna work.
Y'all, I don't know what's going on with my mouse. Before I get started, like Sam said, it's been a challenging couple of weeks and months. I just want to hold space for that. I personally know of just under 10 people in the front line and throughout the ecosystem who have been shot and or killed and or hospitalized or lost their life from stress-related illnesses in the past 2 months. Um, and those individuals deserve acknowledgement. Um, but I also say that so that that's the reality of why we have to keep wellness in the forefront of our minds. And I say our minds because a lot of times wellness is one of those things that we like externalize and we're like, yeah, we need to promote wellness in the field, but I'm okay. Um, or we just dissociate and avoid the conversation. And that's something that we can take because we're all human. We might have, superhero complexes, but we are all human. Um, from a funding standpoint, I will say that there are some tough decisions that are being made in this time. There are a lot of potential funding gaps. But in general, I think funders understand and recognize the importance of wellness. I have had the pleasure of sitting in a lot of rooms where that is a topic of conversation. I've personally seen a lot of amazing strategies regarding the integration of mental health as well as physical wellness being developed and piloted and implemented. I'm thinking of Life Camp in New York. I'm thinking of some of the great work that's going on in the Atlanta area. I've also done some work with the University of Chicago Community Violence Intervention Leadership Academy, where a lot of the capstones, some coming out of Chicago, some coming out of the West Coast as well as the Northeast, specifically are about prioritizing that. I will say we have invested in several wellness strategies, but like Sam said when he opened, there's a lot of people that are reluctant to participate in these services and strategies. And so a lot of times what happens is they become underutilized. And I'm not saying that in any judgmental way. I myself can articulate the importance of wellness, and I'm somebody who does not necessarily utilize the resources that are available to them, and we can justify it as a commitment to community or we're too busy. But the fact is it's a reluctance, and it's something that individually, in community, and in just culturally, we have to have those conversations. Um, and I think, and I also go back to the fact that we always talk about how we're our first participants, and so we can't like. I also hold a lot of space for strategies like ROCA and CVI and things like that, in which we are working with participants on those types of things, but they also have the unintended consequence of having that benefit of making us address our own trauma. My background in a former life was in trauma training, and I also just have to say that like stillness and healing is scary and it's hard, and a lot of times we don't prioritize it because we're afraid we're going to drop the ball, but also because we know from working with other people that we might not be prepared to deal with what may come up. And so we've gotten it down to like where we could acknowledge that it takes a toll, and now we just have to like motivate ourselves and hold like and each other to go through the process of healing it, because we have the resources. And when I say resources, I'm not necessarily mean financial. We have the expertise that is now in this field wanting to support and wanting to help. Now we just have to make it a priority. We have to see it as life-saving work internally within the organizations, the same way that we see the intervention and outreach work as life-saving within the community. And we also have to recognize that saving lives is the primary goal, but if thriving communities as the goal, that self-care, that wellness is the work too. And we have to be genuine in addressing it with ourselves first if we're going to ever help communities get to that point.
I love so much of both of what, or of all of what you both said. And it really speaks to me because my dissertation itself was all around the wellness and working conditions of frontline workers. And I had talked about in that research, like different ways people come to this work. Either it's, a lot of us say it's through a calling. We were spiritually tethered to this work, and that is its own type of weight and doesn't really allow you the space to walk away, because it is really healing for you and also can hurt in some ways because it's very personal. And then I also found other folks who do it from altruistic places. So maybe they're not tethered to it because of a personal situation, but they really do want to see their community be better. And that's a different type of investment. And then there's other folks who come to the work for a job, although that's not the majority of folks that I've come across in my career, nor do I identify with that group. But I am interested, like if you were to talk to a frontline worker in a CVI program, both of you, what is one piece of advice that's related to wellness that you might share with them, either about its importance or a way to go about pursuing it? But what would you say to a frontline worker about this topic?
I'll take a shot. So I think for them to understand, if the car needs a tune-up, we're gonna take it to the mechanic shop. As humans, we're wired a certain way, so we need someone to kind of like make sure we're functioning right. And I think until everyone has their own aha moment or connects with the right behavior and wellness person that makes them feel comfortable, because you're right, Timmeka says we're our own participant, and I'd be like, that's good for you, but I'm not doing it. I get it. I still struggle, right? But until, I guess sometimes what happens in life, we have those moments and you like, man, I'm drowning. I need help. And you'd be like, I remember they told me I should try this. And this is a small doses. And because of our own fears, we'll be like, you need that support system to be like, bro, I see them. So for them, if I went and tried it 1 out of 100, I could at least say, just give it a shot, man. Let's go talk and figure this out. And when they see that they feel like something is lifted off them, then they're all in. They're like, man, this works. But until you have that aha flash moment, we're struggling, and we're gonna try to keep it and carry it in on our own. So we need that support system, others who go through it and they're like, this works. That's what I think.
Yeah. So my hesitancy was because as the sentence was about to come out, I felt the hypocrisy like right here in my chest. And I see some familiar names in the attendee list, and I don't want text messages after this. So I think it would be resist the temptation to isolate. Because there's a lot of vulnerability in people seeing you. And so sometimes when you know you can't hold it together anymore, you just go away, and that's one of the worst things that you can do. I think it's also important that we remember that this work doesn't work without us. Like there is like models and frameworks and all of that, but the people are what really make it work. And you can't take yourself out of the game, and you can't pour from an empty cup. Like that sometimes is cliche, but it's also very true. I think the other part about it is like reminding yourself, what is your goal for participants, right? And if you really want your participants to be able to show up in wholeness, um, and then compare that, like if my participant was in a mental space or in a physical space that I'm in, would I consider myself successful in working with them? And that's asking myself that question back when I was in direct service was probably the most humbling thing. Cause like if your participant came to you and was like, I haven't slept in 2 weeks and I'm living off caffeine and and I'm not eating, right? That just set off 3 red flags and you're immediately gonna jump to action. But how many of us is that our everyday reality? And like we're talking about the importance and the protective factor of community and having people in your corner, and yet we go home and we go home and isolate and avoid others. And so like if our reality doesn't align with our vision for success for others, then we got to bring it into alignment, because without that level of authenticity and being genuine, we cannot be as effective as we would be in the work.
I appreciate both of those responses, and I think they challenge us to be accountable to both who we serve, but also ourselves in ways that are very uncomfortable at times, but are so needed to both of your points. I see a question in the chat that I'm going to paraphrase because it's long and I hope I read it well, but professional development strategies around exiting frontline work. So we're talking a lot about what draws people to the work, but obviously people have transitioned out of the work, some, as you both touched on, in ways where they lost their lives, but others in ways where they self-selected out of the role. And so do you have recommendations, thoughts, reactions to how that should happen in an organizational level, to steward that transition out if you feel like it's time for you to transition out?
I think that, yeah, burnout is something that happens too often in the field. So we're talking about wellness, and that helps us kind of reduce the quicker you get burnt out. But at some point, it takes a toll on you, and mentally, it's gonna sound selfish, but you get to a point that you're like, I can't do this no more. when these guys score and kill these guys, I'm suffering. When they go back and retaliate and kill these guys, I'm suffering. So at some point, you're like, it's just too heavy for me. Like you find yourself like shedding tears and doing that. So then you like, how can I help in a different capacity, right? But also before I exit, I want to make sure and being thoughtful of my partners that are still going to be in the field. Like if I leave, are they ready? Because also my partners are working hard. So I want to check in with them and not be selfish and be like, well, look, I'm tapped out. Where are you all at? So we could figure this out, because I want to make sure when I leave and go help in a different capacity, the wheel is still running, right? So I think that we have to take, I will take my people in consideration if I get to that.
I think we also have to have a conversation about how trauma actually, if left unchecked, can decrease frontline worker safety. Like, it impacts your decision making, and it impacts. I used to tell people like I got to a point where my danger meter was broken, and I recognized that not only was that a risk for myself and the people that I work with, but also for participants. And so when we see it like that, we're more inclined to act swiftly. But I think this goes back to something what Sam said, reminded me of something that we talked about earlier, is like we have to be working on recognizing individuals' transferable skills. And so that when it is time to transition out, they can still feel like they are contributing to the ecosystem, because just because they're burnt out and can't even temporarily be on the front line, there's still a lot of valuable experience and expertise there. That we need more people from the front line in philanthropy to be researchers, to be working within systems, to be making sure that the programming and the RFPs and all of that match the continuing needs of the field. But are we making sure that they have the professional development opportunities, or the opportunities for networking opportunities to be in space with people who can give them that translatable language? And like, also, what is our vision for our staff and our vision for our partners in being able to see all of that expertise as valuable in spaces beyond the front line?
Yeah, I think it's so important. Even when you're serving clients in a direct service role, we talk about exposing them to just different environments that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to see, just because they might be contained to a certain block or whatever. They need help exploring their current, outside of their current reality. But that holds true for professional development. You are not as valuable as the block you have influence over. You have these transferable skills that can be either used to move up in this organization or out and elsewhere in other capacities, in ways that you both touched on. This timing, we have like 10 minutes left. I'm gonna end with this final question. If there's other questions in the chat, please add them. I see some hands raised, but please add your questions to the chat. I'm reminded in our conversation that at its core, this work runs on values and principles that help us stay true to the mission through uncertainty, financial strain, and political headwinds. And so as CVI gains more visibility, the risk of drifting from that center gets very real. And so my final question to both you and the audience, a poll just came up on your screens, is what's one principle or value you believe that we have to hold on to no matter what, even if it costs us funding or favor or speed? In other words, what's the part of this work that is worth protecting at all costs?
One, if I have to pick one, it's at the top of my list. It's the professional understanding that we built with law enforcement that is made out of steel, and we can't break, bend for no one. And two, I'm gonna add this, don't forget to love on your community. It's about them.
Sam, thank you for giving me permission to do more than one. I think we have to remember who we serve and why we're here. In a time where community is not necessarily valued, we cannot underestimate the power of youth and community. Not the power of us individually, not the power of our organization, but the power of the CVI field and the power of community, no matter what. And I think we now more than ever, there is a lot of temptation to move outside of our target population into more into ones that kind of are not facing direct headwinds. We have got to keep wrapping around and loving on those who are at the highest risk of involvement in gun violence. And I know that's a lot of words. A lot of times we shorten it to highest risk, but we got to be really explicit in who this work is supposed to wrap around. Even when it gets hard, even when those headwinds come, it's a relatively small population. It's intensive, it's hard work. However, we have to remain committed to them and remain even on the hardest of days with the vision and the core belief that even the highest risk individual change is possible. And like we can't give up on them in this moment, even when it's really, really hard.
Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat another principle for folks is violence is a byproduct of a lack of power and resources. Your integrity is a value you can't compromise on. I'm also seeing in the chat a question that I think we can close with, unless folks have other questions, but how can you better support your team when they feel like their hard work has gone unnoticed? And I say that kind of building off of what you both just shared, as CVI gains visibility, but how do you remind the folks who are doing the work and also the beneficiaries of that work that people are paying attention and that there is an ecosystem of folks that are here to support the evolution of the work and the investment?
I think celebrating the wins. Too often we're in the fire, running to the fire, and I've had my own moments. I'm pretty sure my colleagues feel that way. You like, is it working, right? Especially when you had a rough week or a rough month and you see so many people losing their life, being affected by gun violence. So you have to take out that time and even if it's going to the office and do something that you normally don't do, grab a pizza and tell the team, like, thank you. Like, think about if we wasn't here doing what we do, how worse it would be, because we don't know what we don't know and we can't see that. So it's often we don't recognize our front staff enough to be like, man, like if you're not doing it, go tell them thank you. I appreciate you. Like what you do, other people can't do that. And the words of encouragement goes a long way and it helps people because you're right. During some of those moments, you doubt if it's working because you're like, man, I've done all this with this participant and how on a Sunday night he got shot and killed. And then you're thinking like, what else could I have done? So I would say take a moment out to thank the front line and celebrate the wins because they are wins, right? And highlighting those moments and then the people that and take time to whatever it is to fill your cup up, let them brothers and sisters fill their cup up.
I don't know that I have much to add. I think we have to have a more expansive view of what success looks like. And I think so. I'm currently in Montgomery, Alabama, on a transformative travel trip with frontline staff and participants from 3 cities across the country. And I think, sometimes we forget about the aha moments that we see or help participants have. And like I have the benefit of being a fly on the wall and just watching people interact with one another. But I think sometimes because in the back of your mind, you're like, I gotta do case notes, I gotta do a report, I gotta, or, you know, you overlook it because you also know some of the other conversations, but like highlighting the aha moment. Do you see the impact that that conversation had? Or did you witness like when this person was having a visible reaction of to what they just saw, they came to you, which means you are a trusted person. Um, a lot of times folks hear all of the things that they have do and all of the things that went wrong, but like taking the time to be intentional and call out those moments that really are success and are like tier one of the success to overall behavioral change. We move so fast that we don't sit still and or we're not present enough to really recognize that. And so if you are proximate to that and you see those, you can either highlight it in that moment or you can make a mental note of it so that when you see that individual having a bad day, recognizing that that too is a success and that too is the work. It is the foundation with which all of the other stuff is built upon. But we have to slow down when possible, because like Sam said, there's a lot of fires to put out, and there will always be. And so if there's not that level of intentionality around it, it's the success is not going to highlight itself always.
I received that call to slow down, and I think we all needed to hear that. And I really appreciate you both for responding to that. We have 4 minutes left. Sam, Timmeka, I just want to thank you so much for showing up with such honesty and heart. If you'd like to share your contact information in the chat, I'm sure folks would love to connect with you. To everyone here, thank you for leaning in and adding your voice to this conversation. What we've heard in the last 45 minutes is more than just ideas. I really see it as a call to act, and it's a reminder of the people and the relationships and the daily acts of courage that make this work possible. And so my hope is that we carry these stories with us, not just as inspiration, but as a commitment to trust the people closest to the work, to invest in them fully, and to keep building safety side by side with the communities we serve. Because if we do that, then what we've shared here won't just stay in rooms like this, but it'll be shaping the world outside of them. And so I thank you in advance for doing your part and know that we are committed to doing ours. Before we go, I just want to give a reminder to save the date for July 20th and 21st in Los Angeles for the 2026 CVI Conference. This is an exclusive announcement that's not even up on the website yet. And we really hope you're excited as we are. We're always thinking of fresh ideas for the space. And I also want to remind you that the program is shaped entirely by what you bring to the table. So when the call for proposals goes out in January, that's your chance to make sure that your ideas, your strategies, your partnerships, and your wins, to Sam's point, are a part of it. So if you felt like something was missing this year, or you have a story you think the field needs to hear, please submit it. And you can always check cviconference.org for latest updates. And if you haven't already, sign up for our newsletter so we can stay connected year round. But thank you both, and thank you all again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye, everyone.